The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Corporal Maria Santos adjusted her gear for what felt like the 100th time. The other Marines around her moved with practiced efficiency, but she could sense the underlying tension that had been building for weeks. The night marksmanship course had become the talk of the base, and not for good reasons. "Another washout last night," Sergeant Rodriguez muttered as he passed her station. "That makes 12 this month." Maria kept her expression neutral, but her stomach tightened. The course had gained an almost mythical reputation among the Marines. It wasn't just about shooting in the dark, it was about precision under impossible conditions, with fog machines creating visibility that dropped to mere feet, targets that moved unpredictably, and time limits that pushed even experienced marksmen to their breaking point. She had watched her fellow Marines return from the course looking defeated, their usual confidence shattered. These were good soldiers, people she respected, but something about this particular challenge was breaking them down one by one. The whispers in the mess hall spoke of impossible conditions, equipment that seemed designed to fail, and instructors who seemed more interested in watching people fail than helping them succeed. "Santos, you're up next week," Sergeant Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying across the training area. "Hope you've been practicing your meditation, because you're going to need all the zen you can get." A few Marines chuckled, but Maria noticed the nervous edge to their laughter. Everyone knew the stakes. This wasn't just another qualification. Word had come down from higher up that performance on this course would factor into upcoming deployment assignments. The Marines who passed would be considered for specialized units, while those who failed would find themselves stuck in routine assignments. Maria had grown up in East LA, where the sound of gunfire was as common as sirens. Her father had been a police officer, killed in the line of duty when she was 16. Her mother had cleaned office buildings at night to keep the family afloat, often taking Maria along because she couldn't afford a babysitter. Those long nights in empty corporate towers had taught Maria something valuable about moving through darkness, about staying calm when everyone else was asleep, about finding focus in the quiet hours when the rest of the world seemed to disappear. She had joined the Marines not for glory or adventure, but because she needed the structure, the purpose, and, honestly, the steady paycheck. The military had given her direction when her life felt like it was spinning out of control. She was good at her job, really good, but she had never been the standout performer, never the one who drew attention from the brass. That afternoon, Maria found herself at the base library, researching everything she could about night vision, marksmanship techniques, and environmental factors that affected shooting accuracy. The librarian, an elderly civilian contractor named Mrs. Chen, noticed her intense focus. "You're preparing for something important," Mrs. Chen observed, setting down a cup of coffee next to Maria's stack of manuals. "The night course," Maria replied without looking up from a diagram showing how fog particles scattered light. "Everyone's failing it." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "My late husband was in the Navy. He used to say that sometimes the military creates tests not to see who can pass them, but to see who won't give up trying." Maria paused her reading. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes the real test isn't about the skill they're measuring. Sometimes it's about persistence, about approaching problems differently, about staying calm when everyone else is panicking." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Have you talked to any of the Marines who failed?" That evening, Maria sought out Corporal Johnson, one of the most respected marksmen in her unit. He was sitting alone in the rec room, staring at a television he wasn't really watching. "Hey Johnson, mind if I ask you about the night course?" Johnson laughed bitterly. "What's to tell? You go in thinking you know how to shoot, and you come out wondering if you know anything at all." "Walk me through it," Maria pressed gently. "What was the hardest part?" Johnson described the course setup, targets at varying distances, some stationary, some moving in unpredictable patterns. The fog was so thick that the usual techniques for estimating distance became useless. The night vision equipment seemed to malfunction constantly, and the time pressure was unlike anything they had experienced in regular training. "But here's the thing that really got me," Johnson continued. "The instructors kept telling us to trust our equipment, to rely on our training, to use the standard techniques. But none of that stuff worked in there. It was like everything I had learned became a liability." Maria nodded, filing away this information. Over the next few days, she talked to 8 more Marines who had failed the course. Their stories were remarkably similar, excellent marksmen who had become paralyzed by conditions that made their proven techniques ineffective. She began to form a theory. What if the course wasn't designed to test traditional marksmanship skills? What if it was designed to identify Marines who could adapt when their usual methods failed? Maria started training differently. Instead of focusing on perfect form and textbook techniques, she practiced shooting with deliberately impaired vision. She had her battle buddy call out random target descriptions while she fired, forcing her to rely on instinct rather than careful aim. She practiced breathing techniques that would keep her calm when technology failed. Most importantly, she started training in actual fog. The base had a section near the coast where natural marine layer often rolled in during the early morning hours. Maria would wake up at 4 a.m. and practice shooting in whatever visibility conditions nature provided. She learned to use sound, to trust peripheral vision, to work with uncertainty rather than fighting against it. Her fellow Marines thought she was crazy. "Santos, you're overthinking this," Corporal Martinez told her. "It's just a shooting test. Either you can hit the target or you can't." But Maria had a feeling it was more complicated than that. The course had been developed by a new training contractor, brought in after a series of real-world incidents where Marines had struggled in low-visibility combat situations. The military wasn't just testing existing skills, they were trying to identify people who could perform when existing skills weren't enough. 2 days before her scheduled attempt, Maria received an unexpected visitor. Gunnery Sergeant Williams, a legend on the base with 3 combat deployments and more decorations than anyone could count, stopped by her bunk during evening inspection. "Santos, I hear you've been asking a lot of questions about the night course." "Yes, Gunny. Just trying to prepare." Williams studied her for a long moment. "What do you think the course is really testing?" Maria took a breath. "I think it's testing who can adapt when their training doesn't apply. Who can stay calm when everything they know stops working." Williams nodded slowly. "Interesting theory. You know, I helped design some of the scenarios for that course. We based them on real situations where Marines had to perform in conditions their training hadn't prepared them for." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "The Marines who have been failing, they're all excellent marksmen. But they've been trying to use precision techniques in situations that require intuitive shooting. They've been fighting the conditions instead of working with them." Maria felt a surge of validation, but also increased pressure. "Any advice, Gunny?" "Yeah. Remember that your equipment is just a tool. Your training is just a foundation. But when you're in there, trust yourself. Trust what your body knows, even when your mind is confused." That night, Maria lay in her bunk thinking about her father. He had been killed during a night raid on a drug house, a situation where split-second decisions and the ability to act under extreme stress made the difference between life and death. She had always wondered if she had inherited his ability to stay calm under pressure, or if that trait had died with him. The morning of her attempt, Maria woke feeling unusually calm. She ate a light breakfast, checked her gear methodically, and arrived at the course facility 30 minutes early. The building looked innocuous from the outside, just another concrete training structure among dozens on the base. Inside, the setup was more elaborate than she had expected. The room was large, probably 50 meters by 30 meters, with complex systems of fog generators, target mechanisms, and observation equipment. The instructors, 3 Marines she didn't recognize, briefed her on the basic rules. "You have 4 rounds to clear 4 targets," the senior instructor explained. "The targets will appear at random intervals and locations. Some will be stationary, others will move. The fog will vary in density throughout the exercise. You'll have standard night vision equipment, but environmental conditions may affect its performance." He handed her a modified M4 rifle with a specialized scope. "The weapon is zeroed and functional. You'll have exactly 4 minutes to complete the course. Any questions?" Maria shook her head. 4 rounds, 4 targets, 4 minutes. It sounded simple, but she knew it wasn't. "One more thing," the instructor added. "Previous candidates have struggled because they've tried to force traditional techniques to work in non-traditional conditions. Keep that in mind." The lights dimmed, and Maria found herself standing in complete darkness. The fog machines began their work, and, within seconds, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Her night vision goggles provided some help, but the fog scattered the infrared light, creating a confusing green haze. The first target appeared to her left, a figure silhouette that popped up behind what looked like a concrete barrier. Through the fog and, with her compromised vision, she couldn't clearly see the target details, but she could sense its general location. Instead of trying to line up a perfect shot, she trusted her instincts, pointed the rifle in the target's direction, and squeezed the trigger. The target dropped. The second target was more challenging, a moving figure that appeared in her peripheral vision and began crossing from right to left. Traditional marksmanship would require her to track the target, calculate its speed, and lead appropriately. But, with the fog and limited visibility, such calculations were impossible. Instead, Maria did something that went against all her formal training. She closed her eyes for a split second, listened to the mechanical sound of the moving target, and fired where she felt it would be. Another hit. The third target tested her patience. Nothing appeared for nearly a minute, and she could hear the clock ticking. The fog seemed to grow thicker, and her night vision equipment began showing signs of malfunction, exactly as the previous candidates had described. When the target finally appeared, it was directly in front of her but partially obscured by what looked like a hanging obstacle. A traditional approach would require her to wait for a clear shot or try to find an angle that avoided the obstruction. But Maria was beginning to understand something important. This course wasn't about perfect shots, it was about effective shots under imperfect conditions. She aimed for the visible portion of the target, accepting that it wasn't an ideal shot, and fired. Hit number 3. The final target was the most challenging yet. It appeared elevated, possibly on a platform or upper level, and seemed to be moving in an irregular pattern. The fog was so thick now that her night vision was providing more confusion than assistance. Maria made a decision that would have horrified her instructors in basic training. She removed her night vision goggles entirely and relied on her natural vision. The fog was still there, but, without the distortion from the electronic equipment, she could better sense the target's general location. She took a deep breath, remembered all those early morning practice sessions in natural fog, trusted the instincts she had developed over weeks of unconventional training, and fired her final round. The lights came up immediately. All 4 targets had been neutralized. Maria had completed the course that had defeated dozens of Marines before her. But, as she stood there in the now bright room, looking at the evidence of her success, she realized that something more important had happened. She had discovered that sometimes the key to success wasn't following the rules perfectly, it was knowing when to break them intelligently. The silence in the debriefing room was deafening. Maria sat across from the 3 instructors, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for their assessment. The senior instructor, Master Sergeant Kelly, was reviewing footage from multiple camera angles, his expression unreadable. "Corporal Santos," he finally said, "in 8 months of running this course, you're the first Marine to achieve a perfect score." Maria nodded, unsure how to respond. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by a mixture of pride and bewilderment. She had succeeded, but she wasn't entirely sure how. "More interesting than your success," continued another instructor, Staff Sergeant Moore, "is your methodology. You broke protocol in several instances. Removing your night vision equipment, for example, goes against standard operating procedure." Master Sergeant Kelly leaned forward. "Walk us through your decision-making process. We need to understand how you approached each target." Maria took a breath and began describing her experience. As she talked, she noticed the instructors exchanging glances. They weren't disappointed in her unconventional approach, they seemed fascinated by it. "The thing is," Maria explained, "everyone told me to trust my equipment and follow my training. But, when I got in there, it became obvious that normal methods weren't going to work. So I started thinking about what would work instead of trying to force what should work." Master Sergeant Kelly nodded. "That's exactly what we were looking for." This course was designed to identify Marines who can adapt their thinking under stress, who can problem solve in real time rather than just execute rehearsed procedures. Staff Sergeant Moore pulled out a tablet and showed Maria statistics from previous attempts. "Look at this data. Every Marine who failed made the same basic mistake. They kept trying to apply peacetime training standards to wartime conditions. They fought against the environment instead of working with it." Maria studied the numbers. Average completion rate, 0%. Average targets hit, 1.3 out of 4. Average time to first shot, 47 seconds. Her own statistics were dramatically different: 4 targets hit, average time to shot, 18 seconds. "Corporal Santos," Master Sergeant Kelly said, "how would you feel about helping us redesign the training program for this course?" Maria was stunned. "Sir, I'm just a corporal. I'm not qualified to design training programs. Actually, you might be the most qualified person we've talked to, Staff Sergeant Moore interjected. You've demonstrated the exact mindset we're trying to develop in other Marines. The question is whether you can teach it. Over the next few days, word of Maria's success spread through the base faster than she had expected. Marines who had failed the course approached her with mixtures of congratulations and curiosity. Some seemed genuinely interested in learning from her experience, while others appeared skeptical that her success was anything more than luck. Corporal Johnson found her during lunch, sitting with several other Marines who were scheduled for upcoming attempts at the course. Santos, I've got to ask, what did you do differently? Because I've been shooting for 8 years, and I couldn't hit anything in that fog. Maria looked around the table at the expectant faces. These were good Marines, experienced marksmen, people whose opinions she respected. The pressure of explaining her success felt almost as intense as the course itself had been. I think the biggest difference was that I stopped trying to shoot the way we were taught in training, she said carefully. In there, perfect form and precise aiming were actually making things harder. Corporal Martinez, scheduled for his attempt the following week, leaned forward. So what, you just sprayed and prayed? No, definitely not, Maria replied. It was more like trusting different senses. Using peripheral vision instead of direct sight. Listening to sounds. Feeling where the target was rather than trying to calculate where it was. The Marines around the table exchanged glances. What Maria was describing sounded almost mystical, certainly not like standard military training. Look, Maria continued, I spent weeks before my attempt training in actual fog. I practiced shooting when I couldn't see clearly. I learned to work with uncertainty instead of fighting it. Sergeant Rodriguez approached their table. Santos, Master Sergeant Kelly wants to see you in his office. Bring your gear. In Master Sergeant Kelly's office, Maria found herself face-to-face with Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the base training commander. She had never spoken directly to an officer of his rank before. Corporal Santos, I've been reviewing your performance data and the instructor's reports. I understand you have some unconventional theories about night combat marksmanship. Yes, sir. I mean, not theories exactly, sir. More like observations about what worked for me. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison smiled. Relax, Corporal. You're not in trouble. In fact, we're considering implementing some changes to our training protocols based on your success. But, first, we need to see if your approach can be replicated. He explained that Maria would be working with a team of training specialists to develop new preparation methods for the night course. More immediately, she would be mentoring the next group of Marines scheduled for attempts. Sir, with respect, I'm not sure I can teach what I did. A lot of it was intuitive. That's exactly why we need your help, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison replied. Traditional military training focuses on standardized, repeatable procedures. But modern combat increasingly requires adaptive thinking. We need to figure out how to train intuition. The following Monday, Maria found herself in the unusual position of leading a training session for 12 Marines, including several who outranked her. The group included Corporal Martinez, Sergeant Kim, and even Staff Sergeant Thompson, a decorated veteran with 2 combat deployments. I know this is weird, Maria began, having a corporal teach senior Marines. But, the instructors think I might be able to help you prepare for the night course differently than traditional training methods. Staff Sergeant Thompson raised his hand. Santos, no disrespect, but I've been doing this for 12 years. I've shot in Iraq and Afghanistan, in conditions you can't imagine. How is it that I can't pass a training course that you mastered? It was a fair question, and Maria had been dreading it. I think, Staff Sergeant, that your experience might actually be part of the problem. You've learned to be excellent at what you do, which makes it harder to adapt when the situation requires different skills. The room was quiet. What Maria was suggesting bordered on insubordination, that experience could be a liability. Let me ask you this, Maria continued carefully. When you were in combat, were the conditions ever exactly like what you trained for? Staff Sergeant Thompson considered this. Never. There were always variables we hadn't prepared for. And, how did you handle those situations? We adapted. We improvised. We used whatever worked. Maria nodded. That's exactly what the night course requires. But, when we go in there thinking it's a test of our marksmanship skills, we try to use marksmanship solutions, when really it's a test of our adaptation skills. She led the group through exercises she had developed during her own preparation. They practiced shooting with deliberately impaired vision, using peripheral awareness, relying on sound and instinct rather than precise sight pictures. Initially, the Marines struggled with these unconventional methods. Their muscle memory and training kept pulling them back toward standard techniques. But, gradually, some began to show improvement. Sergeant Kim was the first to grasp the concept. "It's like learning to drive in snow," he said during a break. "All the normal rules still apply, but you have to use them differently." "Exactly," Maria replied. "Your marksmanship skills are still important. But, in the night course, they're tools to be adapted, not rules to be followed." By the end of the week, the group had developed a different relationship with uncertainty and impaired visibility. They were still nervous about the course, but they approached that nervousness differently. Maria's most significant challenge came from Corporal Martinez, who seemed determined to prove that traditional methods could work if applied with enough skill and determination. "Santos, I appreciate what you're trying to teach us, but I've got to be honest, this touchy-feely, trust your instincts stuff doesn't feel like military training to me." Maria understood his skepticism. What she was advocating did seem to contradict everything they had learned about military precision and standardization. "Martinez, can I ask you something? What's the most important thing in combat?" "Mission success. Getting the job done." "Right. And if using standard techniques gets the job done, you use them. But if standard techniques don't work, what then?" Martinez paused. "I guess you do whatever does work. That's all I'm saying. The night course creates conditions where standard techniques don't work. So we need to be ready to do whatever does work." The test of Maria's teaching came the following week when Corporal Martinez and 2 other Marines from her training group attempted the course. Maria waited in the debriefing room, as nervous as if she were taking the course herself. Corporal Martinez emerged after his attempt looking stunned. "I can't believe it," he said. "I actually passed." Of the 3 Marines who had received Maria's preparation training, 2 passed the course, a success rate of 67% compared to the previous 0% rate. Master Sergeant Kelly called Maria into his office that afternoon. "Corporal Santos, your training methods are showing real results. We're going to be expanding this program, and we want you to lead the development effort." Maria felt overwhelmed. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm just figuring this out myself. I don't think I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." "Actually," Master Sergeant Kelly smiled, "the fact that you're still figuring it out is exactly why you're the right person for this job. The moment you think you have all the answers is the moment you stop learning." That evening, Maria called her mother for the first time in weeks. She had been so focused on the course and its aftermath that she had neglected most of her personal connections. "Mija, you sound different," her mother observed. "More confident." Maria tried to explain what had been happening, the course, the success, the new responsibility she was being given. As she talked, she realized that something fundamental had changed in how she saw herself and her capabilities. "You know what this reminds me of?" her mother said. "When you were little, you used to insist on assembling those complicated toys by yourself, without looking at the instructions. You would figure out your own way of putting them together." Maria had forgotten about that tendency. "Did I usually succeed?" "Oh yes, but not in the way the instructions intended. You would create something that worked, but it was always a little different from what the toy company had designed." As Maria hung up the phone, she reflected on her mother's observation. Maybe her approach to the night course wasn't an anomaly. Maybe it was an extension of a pattern that had been part of her personality all along, the tendency to find alternative solutions when conventional approaches didn't work. The next morning brought new challenges. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison informed her that her training methods would be tested on a larger scale, with 2 full platoons of Marines scheduled to undergo her preparation program before attempting the night course. "Corporal Santos, you've stumbled onto something important here. But now we need to see if it scales. Can you teach 50 Marines what you taught 5? Standing in front of 2 platoons of Marines, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These weren't just test subjects, they were fellow Marines whose careers and, potentially their lives might depend on the skills she was trying to teach them. But, as she looked out at their faces, she saw the same mixture of determination and uncertainty that she had felt before her own attempt at the course. They were professionals, good at their jobs, but facing a challenge that their normal skills couldn't solve. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak, knowing that she was about to test whether intuition and adaptation could really be taught, or whether her success had been nothing more than a lucky accident. The training facility buzzed with an energy Maria had never experienced before. Word had spread throughout Camp Pendleton about the new preparation methods, and Marines from other units were requesting permission to observe her sessions. The pressure was enormous, not just to succeed, but to prove that her approach wasn't a fluke. Standing before 50 Marines from 2 different platoons, Maria felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that came before any major challenge. These weren't just any Marines, they included squad leaders, decorated veterans, and Marines who had already failed the night course multiple times using traditional preparation methods. "I know most of you have heard rumors about what we're going to do here," Maria began, her voice carrying across the training room. "Some of you probably think it's going to be some kind of mystical, new age nonsense. I want to be clear from the start, everything we're going to practice is based on real skills and real techniques. We're just applying them differently." Gunnery Sergeant Williams, who had become an unofficial mentor to Maria, stood at the back of the room observing. His presence both reassured and intimidated her. If this training failed, it wouldn't just reflect poorly on her, it would call into question the entire program. "The night course has a 100% failure rate," Maria continued. "Not because the Marines attempting it lack skill, but because they're trying to use daylight techniques in conditions that require different approaches." She gestured to a whiteboard where she had outlined the basic principles they would be working on: environmental awareness, adaptive targeting, stress management under uncertainty, and equipment independence. "Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to retrain your instincts. Not replace your existing skills, but expand them to work in situations where traditional methods fall short." The first few days were challenging. Many of the Marines struggled with exercises that deliberately impaired their normal shooting processes. Staff Sergeant Garcia, a scout sniper with 3 deployments, became openly frustrated during a drill where Marines were required to shoot while wearing glasses smeared with petroleum jelly to simulate fog conditions. "This is ridiculous," Garcia muttered loud enough for others to hear. "In real combat, you don't handicap yourself. You use every advantage you have." Maria paused the exercise. This was exactly the kind of resistance she had expected, and how she handled it would determine whether the rest of the training succeeded. "Staff Sergeant Garcia, you're absolutely right. In real combat, you use every advantage you have. But what happens when those advantages aren't available? What happens when your night vision fails, when environmental conditions make your scope useless, when you have to take a shot under conditions your training never prepared you for?" Garcia considered this. "You do whatever you have to do to complete the mission." "Exactly. And that's what we're training, the whatever you have to do part." Maria asked Garcia to step forward. "Staff Sergeant, you've been in real combat situations. Tell us about a time when you had to adapt your usual techniques because conditions were different than expected." Garcia thought for a moment. "Fallujah, 2006. We were in an urban environment, lots of dust and smoke. My scope was useless because of particles in the air. I had to take a shot at about 200 meters using basically iron sights and instinct." "Did you make the shot?" "Yes." "How?" Garcia paused. "I stopped trying to use the scope, trusted what I could actually see, and fired when it felt right." Maria nodded. "That's exactly what we're training. The ability to stop using tools that aren't working and trust alternative methods." From that point forward, Staff Sergeant Garcia became one of Maria's most effective assistants. His combat experience provided credibility that her corporal rank couldn't, and his conversion to the new methods influenced other skeptical Marines. The breakthrough came during the second week of training. Maria had set up a scenario using actual fog generators in a large training area, creating conditions similar to those in the night course. Marines worked in pairs, with one acting as a spotter and the other as the shooter. Lance Corporal Peterson, who had failed the night course twice using traditional preparation, was struggling with a moving target exercise. He kept trying to track the target with his scope, becoming frustrated as the fog made precise tracking impossible. "Peterson, stop," Maria called out. "Close your eyes for a second." "Ma'am?" "Trust me. Close your eyes and listen." Peterson closed his eyes. The mechanical sound of the moving target became more distinct without visual distraction. Now, without opening your eyes, point to where you think the target is. Peterson pointed. He was slightly off, but close enough that a shot would have been effective. Open your eyes and look where you're pointing. Don't use your scope, just look with your natural vision. Peterson opened his eyes and adjusted his aim slightly. I can see something moving there. Now fire when it feels right. Don't think about it. Peterson fired and hit the target. Not a perfect center mass shot, but a definite hit that would have been tactically effective. How did that feel different? Maria asked. It was easier, Peterson replied, sounding surprised. I stopped trying so hard to see everything perfectly and just reacted to what I could actually perceive. This success created a ripple effect throughout the training group. Marines began to understand that the goal wasn't to abandon their skills, but to access different aspects of those skills when normal methods didn't apply. Sergeant Kim, who had been struggling with the concept, had his own breakthrough during a stress shooting exercise. It's like driving, he said during a break. When you're learning, you think about every action consciously. But, when you're experienced, your hands know what to do before your brain catches up. That's exactly right, Maria replied. We're training your hands and your instincts to know what to do when your brain can't process all the information it normally relies on. By the end of the second week, the Marines were performing significantly better in simulated night course conditions. But, the real test would come when they actually attempted the course itself. The first group of 5 Marines was scheduled for attempts on Monday morning. Maria spent the weekend reviewing footage of their training sessions, looking for any weaknesses that might need last-minute correction. Master Sergeant Kelly found her in the video review room late Sunday night. Santos, you need to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. I keep thinking I should be doing more to prepare them, Maria replied. What if my methods don't work for other people? What if I just got lucky? Kelly sat down beside her. Let me tell you something about military training. Every effective technique started with one person who did something different. The question isn't whether you got lucky, the question is whether what you discovered can help other Marines. But, if they fail tomorrow, it means my approach doesn't work. No, Kelly corrected. If they fail tomorrow, it means we need to refine the approach. Failure is data, not defeat. Monday morning arrived with unusual tension in the air. The 5 Marines scheduled for attempts included Lance Corporal Peterson, Staff Sergeant Garcia, and 3 others who had worked closely with Maria during the training period. Unlike previous attempts, where Marines had gone to the night course with grim resignation, this group displayed quiet confidence. They understood that they were testing not just their own skills, but an entirely new approach to military training. Peterson went first. Maria waited in the observation room with the instructors, watching multiple camera feeds as Peterson moved through the course. The fog was particularly thick that morning, and the targets were configured for maximum difficulty. But Peterson moved through the course differently than previous candidates. Instead of fighting the fog, he seemed to work with it. Instead of trying to force his equipment to provide perfect information, he used it as one tool among many. When Peterson emerged from the course, his expression was calm. 4 targets down, he reported. Staff Sergeant Garcia went next, and his performance was even more impressive. His combat experience, combined with the new techniques, made him devastatingly effective in the challenging conditions. By the end of the morning, 4 of the 5 Marines had passed the course, an 80% success rate that exceeded everyone's expectations. The one Marine who failed, Corporal Thompson, approached Maria afterward with a question that would prove crucial to the program's development. Santos, I understand the techniques you taught us, and I tried to apply them. But something didn't click for me. How do you teach someone to trust their instincts when they don't know what their instincts are telling them? It was a profound question that Maria hadn't fully considered. Her own instincts had developed through years of specific experiences, starting with those childhood nights in empty office buildings with her mother. But, how do you accelerate that kind of development? That's actually a great question, Thompson. Maybe we need to add more exercises that help people identify what their instincts feel like. Over the following weeks, as more Marines went through Maria's preparation program and attempted the night course, patterns began to emerge. Marines with certain types of background experience, those who had grown up in urban environments, those who had experience with hunting or outdoor activities, those who had dealt with high-stress situations requiring quick adaptation, tended to respond more quickly to the training. But even Marines without these backgrounds could develop the necessary skills with additional preparation time and more targeted exercises. Maria found herself working with training specialists, psychologists, and combat veterans to refine and expand the program. What had started as an individual success was evolving into a comprehensive new approach to training Marines for unpredictable combat conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison called her into his office 6 weeks after the program had begun. "Corporal Santos, I've been reviewing the statistics from your training program. We now have a 73% pass rate on the night course, compared to the previous 0% rate. More importantly, the Marines who complete your program are showing improved performance in other areas that require adaptive thinking." Maria felt a surge of pride, but also a growing sense of responsibility. "Sir, I think we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. The more we learn about how to teach adaptation and intuitive skills, the more applications we find." "I agree. Which is why I'm recommending you for promotion to sergeant and assignment to the Marine Corps Training Command. We want you to help develop similar programs for other specialized training challenges." As Maria left the lieutenant colonel's office, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been just another corporal, competent but not exceptional. Now she was pioneering new approaches to military training that could potentially affect thousands of Marines. But the most important change wasn't in her rank or her responsibilities. It was in her understanding of her own capabilities and her confidence in trusting her instincts when conventional wisdom fell short. That evening, she called her mother to share the news about her promotion and new assignment. "Mija, I'm so proud of you. But I have to ask, are you happy?" It was a question Maria hadn't really considered. She had been so focused on the technical aspects of her success that she hadn't reflected on how it felt personally. "You know what, Mom? I am happy. For the first time since Dad died, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters, something that honors his memory by helping other people stay safe." As she prepared for sleep that night, Maria looked back on the journey that had brought her to this point. It had started with a simple challenge, a training course that seemed designed to be impossible. But by approaching that challenge differently, by trusting unconventional methods and helping others do the same, she had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to test whether the principles she had discovered could be applied in even more complex situations. But tonight, she felt ready for whatever came next. 6 months later, Sergeant Maria Santos stood in a conference room at Marine Corps Base Quantico, facing a panel of senior officers from multiple branches of the military. The walls were lined with commendations and historical photographs, a reminder of the long tradition of military excellence she was now part of shaping. The night course program had exceeded all expectations. The pass rate had stabilized at 78%, and, more importantly, Marines who completed the training were showing improved performance across a wide range of combat scenarios. The principles Maria had discovered were proving applicable far beyond the specific challenge of shooting in fog. "Sergeant Santos," Colonel Matthews began, "your training methodology has attracted attention from Special Operations Command, Army Rangers, and Navy SEALs. They want to understand how we can apply these adaptive training principles to their specialized programs." Maria felt the familiar mixture of pride and nervousness that had become constant companions since her promotion. The scope of what she was being asked to do kept expanding beyond anything she had imagined when she first stepped into that foggy training room. "Sir, I think the key insight is that we can't just train people to execute procedures perfectly. We have to train them to think creatively when procedures don't work." General Rodriguez, a decorated combat veteran with command experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, leaned forward. "Sergeant, I've read the reports from your program participants. Many of them describe their experience as transformative, not just professionally but personally. Can you explain that phenomenon?" Maria had noticed this pattern in feedback from Marines who completed her program. They frequently reported increased confidence in civilian situations, better problem-solving abilities, and what many described as a greater sense of personal agency. "General, I think when people discover they can trust their own judgment in high-stress situations, it changes how they see themselves. They realize they have capabilities they didn't know about." "And you believe this can be taught systematically?" "Yes, sir. But it requires a different approach than traditional military training. Instead of teaching people to suppress their individual judgment in favor of standardized procedures, we teach them to use both, to know when procedures apply and when they need to adapt. The questions continued for 2 hours. Maria described training methods, success rates, psychological principles, and applications she had observed in real combat situations. Several Marines who had completed her program were now deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and their commanding officers reported notably improved performance in unpredictable situations. After the briefing, Maria found herself walking the grounds at Quantico with Gunnery Sergeant Williams, who had been reassigned to help expand the adaptive training program. "Santos, you realize what you've accomplished here goes way beyond teaching people to shoot in the dark, right?" "What do you mean, Gunny?" "You've figured out how to train people to be creative under pressure. That's something the military has struggled with for decades, how to maintain discipline and standardization while also encouraging innovation and adaptation." Maria reflected on this observation. When she had first approached the night course, she had simply been trying to solve a specific problem. She hadn't realized she was developing principles that could revolutionize military training. "The thing is," she replied, "I don't think I figured anything out. I think I just paid attention to what actually worked instead of what was supposed to work." That's exactly the point. Most people get so invested in doing things the right way that they miss opportunities to do things the effective way. That evening, Maria received a phone call that would change her perspective once again. Captain Jennifer Chen, a Marine intelligence officer recently returned from deployment in Syria, had requested to speak with her about the adaptive training program. "Sergeant Santos, I wanted to thank you personally. I went through your program 8 months ago, before my deployment. Last week, that training probably saved my life and the lives of my team." Maria listened intently as Captain Chen described a situation where standard intelligence gathering procedures had become ineffective due to unexpected circumstances. Instead of continuing to follow protocols that weren't working, she had applied the adaptive thinking principles from Maria's training to develop an alternative approach that successfully completed the mission. "The thing that struck me," Captain Chen continued, "was that I didn't panic when my normal methods failed. Your training had taught me that failure of standard procedures wasn't a crisis, it was just information that told me I needed to try something different." After the call, Maria sat in her quarters thinking about the expanding impact of work that had begun with her personal struggle to pass a single training course. Marines throughout the military were applying principles they had learned in her program to situations she had never imagined. The next morning brought a new challenge. Major Thompson from Marine Corps Training Command informed her that the Navy was requesting her assistance in developing training programs for submarine crews who needed to perform under extremely stressful conditions with limited information. "Sergeant Santos, the submarine service has specific challenges that are similar to what your night course addresses. Crew members often have to make critical decisions based on incomplete information in high-stress environments, when standard procedures may not apply. The assignment would require Maria to spend 3 months at Naval Submarine Base New London, working with submarine crews to understand their training needs and develop appropriate adaptive training protocols." As she prepared for this new assignment, Maria reflected on how her definition of success had evolved. Initially, she had measured success simply by whether she could pass the night course. Then, it became about whether she could help other Marines pass the course. Now it was about whether she could help military personnel across all branches perform more effectively in unpredictable situations. The submarine assignment proved to be both challenging and rewarding. Working with Navy personnel required Maria to adapt her own methods, the same flexibility she taught to others. Submarine operations involved different types of stress, different equipment, and different decision-making processes than ground combat. But the underlying principles remained consistent. Whether a Marine was shooting in fog or a sailor was managing a submarine emergency, the key skills were the same: remaining calm under pressure, trusting judgment when instruments failed, and adapting procedures to meet unexpected circumstances. Commander Sarah Wilson, the submarine training officer Maria worked with most closely, became both a colleague and a friend during the 3-month assignment. "Maria," Commander Wilson said during one of their planning sessions, "what you're really teaching is courage. Not physical courage, these sailors already have that. You're teaching them the courage to trust themselves when everything they've been trained to rely on stops working." The submarine training program launched successfully, with crews showing significant improvement in emergency response scenarios and complex problem-solving exercises. But, more importantly for Maria, the experience taught her that the principles she had discovered had applications far beyond the military. Upon returning to Quantico, Maria was surprised to find a letter waiting for her from an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a trauma therapist who worked with veterans, had read about Maria's training methods in a professional journal and wanted to explore applications for civilian mental health treatment. Sergeant Santos, the letter read, "What you're teaching Marines about trusting their judgment under stress has remarkable parallels to therapeutic techniques we use to help trauma survivors rebuild confidence in their own perceptions and decision-making abilities." This connection between military training and civilian therapy opened up possibilities Maria had never considered. Over the following months, she began consulting with mental health professionals, emergency responders, and even corporate training specialists who were interested in applying adaptive thinking principles to their respective fields. A year after her original success with the night course, Maria found herself testifying before a congressional subcommittee on military readiness about the importance of adaptive training in modern warfare. Congressman Bradley, she explained in response to a question about cost-effectiveness, traditional military training focuses on preparing people for known challenges. But modern conflicts increasingly involve unknown challenges. We need to train people to be effective when they encounter situations their specific training didn't cover. The congressional testimony led to increased funding for adaptive training programs across all branches of the military. More importantly for Maria, it solidified her understanding of her role not just as a trainer, but as an advocate for a fundamentally different approach to human development. Standing in her apartment that evening, looking at commendations and certificates that covered one entire wall, Maria called her mother. "Nija, I saw you on the news today. You looked so confident up there. Mom, sometimes I can't believe this is really my life. 3 years ago, I was just another Marine trying not to mess up. Now I'm testifying before Congress about training programs I developed." "You know what I think happened?" her mother asked. "I think you stopped trying to be what other people expected you to be and started being who you actually are." Maria considered this observation. Her mother might be right. Her success hadn't come from trying to be better at doing things the way everyone else did them. It had come from trusting her own judgment about what actually worked. "The funny thing is," Maria replied, "I'm teaching other people to do exactly that, to trust their own judgment when conventional approaches don't work." 2 weeks later, Maria received orders for her next assignment, developing adaptive training protocols for Marine units preparing for deployment to volatile regions where conventional tactics might not be sufficient. It was exactly the kind of challenge she had learned to embrace: complex, unprecedented, and requiring creative solutions. As she prepared for this new responsibility, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from a struggling corporal to a recognized expert in military training innovation. The path hadn't been linear or predictable, but it had been authentic to her own strengths and insights. Most importantly, she had learned that true expertise wasn't about mastering established techniques, it was about developing the wisdom to know when those techniques needed to be modified or abandoned entirely. Standing in the same training facility where she had first encountered the night course, Maria watched a new group of Marines preparing for their attempts. Some looked nervous, others confident, but all of them were approaching the challenge with methods she had helped develop. Corporal Jackson, one of her current trainees, approached her after a practice session. "Sergeant, I've got to ask, when you first took this course, did you know you were going to revolutionize military training?" Maria laughed. "Jackson, when I first took this course, I was just trying not to fail. Everything that came after was a surprise. So how do you know when to trust your instincts versus following established procedures?" It was a question Maria had been asked hundreds of times, and her answer had evolved as her understanding deepened. The key is recognizing that instincts and procedures aren't opposites, they're tools. Good judgment is knowing which tool is right for the situation you're actually facing, not the situation you wish you were facing. As the training session concluded and the Marines departed, Maria stood alone in the facility where her career had transformed. The fog machines were silent, the targets were stored, but the principles that had emerged from this room continued to influence military training around the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to test and refine the concepts she had developed. But tonight, she felt deeply satisfied knowing that her work was helping other people discover capabilities they never knew they possessed, the same gift that discovering those capabilities had given to her. The night course had taught her that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not from following the rules more perfectly, but from having the courage to find better ways of achieving what the rules were designed to accomplish. It was a lesson she would carry forward into whatever challenges awaited her, confident in her ability to adapt, learn, and help others do the same.